Talk of the semester. It is a very interesting talk. We have Sunishka from the IB department. Thank you. Who's going to be talking to us about the many ways to find a mate. So please put your hands together for Sunishka.
Hi everyone. Okay. My name is Sunishka. I'm a fifth year PhD student here at UT Austin. Can everybody hear me? Closer. Okay. How about now? Okay. Alright. First, a little bit about me. So I graduated with a bachelor's degree in genetics from the University of Georgia in Athens. And go dogs. I worked with plants at first. That was my introduction to scientific research. But after working in greenhouses for 3 years, I decided I needed something more exciting. And so I joined a lab at Florida Atlantic University, where I worked with these cave fish. And this is going to be such a digression from what I'm talking about, but they're very cool, so I'll tell you a little bit about them. So at Florida Atlantic University, I worked with cave fish, but a lot of the fish I worked with were tiny larvae, and I used to put them in plates like this, using pipettes, and then monitor their behavior in these tiny little pools, right? Because they're so small. And we used to record them for 24 hours, see at what periods they were inactive, and measure sleep behavior. And something that I did in this lab was trying to understand how sleep behavior works in the context due to certain genes that might also cause other traits to be different. So this is Astyanax mexicanus, or the Mexican tetra. On top, you can see a river morph of the species, and on the bottom here, that's a cave morph of the species. The cave morphs have lost their eyesight and their pigmentation. So what we were able to do in this lab is create a mutant river morph that has the loss of this OCA2 gene, and so it doesn't have any pigmentation. So it still has eyes, but they're red because there's no melanin. And I found that these animals also have a reduction in sleep behavior, similar to how cavefish have a reduction in sleep behavior. So one gene causing multiple effects, which is called pleiotropic effects. So that was my research before I came to Austin. But these were some interesting behaviors, sleep, feeding, but what I was really interested in understanding is how organisms interact with each other. And so here at UT Austin, I've been working with this fish called swordtails that I'll talk about a little bit during my talk. I've been working with a really cool group of people in Dr. Molly Cummings' lab. And what we do is we bring these fish into our lab and put them in these little tanks and measure their behaviors, which I'll tell you a little bit later in my talk. This is just me showing my grandma how things work. And I think she finds it interesting, and hope you do too. So let's start our talk. So my talk is going to be about how there are many ways to find a mate. I studied this in my research, but I thought it would be good to kind of zoom out into the entire animal kingdom and give you guys an overview of how many different ways there are to find mates and do mating. So when we think of finding mates, a lot of us think about these elaborate ways to court, right? There's these peacocks, there are super birds of paradise and anoles, and all of them have these really cool characteristics that allow them to attract females. They have bright coloration, ornamentation, song and dance. So this is a male super bird of paradise trying to attract a female. And a lot of these species, the males are bright and colorful, while the females are drab and selecting mates based on these kind of characteristics. So this is called courtship. But some males can go above and beyond just using ornamentation and coloration. So this is a bowerbird. Bowerbirds are a group of birds that are found in Australia and Papua New Guinea that do these really cool things. They design nests that are bowers. So this male has actually constructed this huge roof at the back. They're actually being held up by pillars also, which is incredible for a bird to do. So already the construction is really cool. But then these males also bring a variety of things from around the forest and then place them in the front of their bower and use this to attract females. So this bird, this vogelbug bowerbird, has brought flowers and fruit and also beetle casings that has found around the forest and placed it in front. And they actually spend a lot of their time just arranging and rearranging these items so that they become the most attractive bower in the entire neighborhood. And females will go around, assess these different bowers, and mate with the male whose bowers they find most attractive. There are many types of bowerbirds. So this one is a satin bowerbird, which will typically come up when you Google bowerbirds. And you can see that they're slightly bluish in color, and females are attracted to this blue color. So what they will do is they'll decorate their bower with blue items. And you can see here this bird has gotten a little creative and is using plastic pieces that are blue in color to decorate its bower. But beyond courtship and ornamentation, there's also male-male aggression that's pretty common. So in elephant seals, males can get really large in order to fight other males to gain access to females. And then in mountain goats, they develop these huge horns that they can use for, again, aggression towards other males. So with all these examples, why is it typically that males are developing these characteristics, whereas the females are more like making the choice of which males to mate with? So in my talk today, any individuals that produce sperm are referred to as males, and any individuals that produce eggs are referred to as females. And typically females are investing a lot into eggs, right? They have a limited number of them, and they put in a lot of nutrients and such into their eggs, and they're typically much larger than sperm, whereas sperm is relatively cheaper to produce. So there's always been this idea that because of this, males invest more in these other sorts of characteristics, and there's a female choosiness for male characteristics. However, that is not always the case. So in this photo, could someone tell me which one's the female and which one's the male? Bottom one. Which one's the male?
The bottom one.
Bottom one. You'd be correct, right? And so the top one is actually a female. However, in this species, there's choice for the female's orange patch, and the coloration of that determines if the male will mate with her or not. The brighter it is and the bigger it is, the more attractive this female is. What about these birds? Which one's the male?
Left.
Yes. Okay, so that's the male, that's the female. But in this species too, these are blue throats, there's choice for the female's throat coloration. And you can see how much it varies across different females. This is an example of a species where there's kind of both female and male choice. And lastly, in these newts, which one do you think is the male? So the female is the one on the top there. And her belly coloration, actually, it doesn't matter how bright it is. I think in this species, males prefer females and have more yellow colored bellies compared to more reddish colors. So male choosiness also exists, right? Males can also be choosy about the females they mate with, because males are also investing quite a lot into reproduction. There's something called Bateman's principle that was developed by Bateman in the 1980s that said males actually benefit from mating with multiple females across their lifetime. This is what increases their fitness. So fitness is just how well you're able to pass down your genes, right? And for males, it's advantageous to invest more, mate with multiple mates, and to increase their fitness. Whereas for females, the advantage of mating with multiple males just doesn't exist. It like tapers off after a certain point. And for females, it's better off if they're spending more time into gaining resources and spending more time, say, in performing parental care. Now, this is a very mammal-centric view, right? We typically see species like mice. Females are the ones taking care of offspring. Males are going around and mating with multiple females. A system like this is known as a polygynous system. So this is polygyny or polygyny. So polygyny is when one male mates with multiple females, and we have a lot of examples of this in the animal kingdom. But again, this is not the only system that exists. There's also polyandry, where one female mates with multiple males. So, and this exists in mammals as well. So dugongs, for example, these beautiful sea creatures, where one female will have two male partners that she'll mate with, go away, take care of the offspring, come back and mate with these same males. In rattlesnakes, when you look at a clutch of eggs from a rattlesnake, it typically has more than one father. And this is common in them because they have long-term sperm storage, the ability to do long-term sperm storage, which means that when they are eventually investing in, developing one clutch of eggs, multiple male sperm is getting fertilized. And then there's emus that actually perform paternal care. So only the fathers take care of the offspring in this species. And due to this, the females actually go around mating with multiple males, while the males then stay and then take care of the offspring. And of course, there's also polygynandry, where many males and many females will mate with each other. All types of systems exist. So polygamy is very common in the animal kingdom, but there's also social monogamy that's pretty common. So the reason I'm calling it social monogamy will become clear in a second. So social monogamy is defined as pair bonding between a male and a female, which exclusively mate with one another and raise offspring together and spend time together. So in birds, social monogamy is very common. About 90% of birds are socially monogamous, one exemption being the emus, for example. But in these house wrens, how social monogamy works is that they will mate with each other and raise a group of a clutch of eggs together, but only for single nesting in a breeding season. Then they'll move on to other partners. This is still called monogamy because they're still staying together and going through the whole process of raising the offspring together and then moving apart. So monogamy comes in many forms. And then in American robins, what happens is they will mate with, only one male and female will mate with each other, but this happens throughout the breeding season, through multiple nestings in the entire breeding season. Whereas for swans, they will mate for life. They will only have one partner throughout. However, you would assume that this is advantageous because the males and the females will stay together and raise a group of eggs. And so the male is kind of sure that, oh, all of these eggs that I'm raising are my own offspring. But this is not always true. So in superb fairy wrens, for example, that are these very cute, cuddly birds, they are kind of anomalous in this, that this is a very crazy statistic, but DNA fingerprinting revealed that most offspring, about 76% in this study, were sired by an extra group males that contributed no care. So in one group of eggs, about 76% of the eggs were of the males that were not taking care of that egg. And then almost all broods, which is 95% of broods, contain young sired by extra group fathers. So fathers cannot always be sure that they are taking care only of their offspring in these birds, but also their offspring are being taken care of by other birds. Kind of evens out. This is called extra pair paternity and is extremely common also across birds. So birds are classically known to be socially monogamous, but extra pair paternity is also extremely common. Prairie voles are a classic example of a species that has pair bonding. So they actually, I'm so sorry for that. They mate with each other for life. They are a very classic system used by researchers here at UT and in many other places to study the neurobiology of love. However, year two, up to 50%, more than 50% of litters can contain individuals that were born from other fathers. So pair bonding happens. Males will stay with the female and raise offspring together, but they may often be raising other males as offspring. So what happens in prairie voles, the reason this happens is because there's males that are stationary, we call them either stationary or the ones that actually do pair bonding. And there are also males that are wandering. So that they're called the wandering male type and then the stationary male type. The stationary male has an advantage where he's staying with the same female constantly, doesn't have to work too hard to gain more matings with her, is raising his own offspring, right? So there's advantages to being a stationary male. There's also advantages of being a wandering male, where you can go around and make sure your lineage is being passed on by mating with multiple different females, and you don't have to perform parental care. So they have an advantage where they're saving energy, but then also, remember, all females are not going to accept mating with a wandering male. Some females stay loyal to their pair bonding male partner. So a system like this, where different male types or different types of mating tactics exist and have different advantages and disadvantages, is known as an alternative mating tactics, a system with alternative mating tactics. So one classic example of alternative mating tactics is the bluegill sunfish. They're found in freshwater, just like streams and rivers across the US. And in this species, the male I just showed you is a nesting male. He has many names. He's the courting male, the nesting male, the parental male. What these males do is they build little nests, or they dig out a hole in the riverbed, and the female comes in and she'll lay her eggs in this ditch if the male is able to court with her, and the male releases the sperm, the female releases her eggs, and the offspring actually grow up in this nest when the male is taking care of them by guarding them in this nest. So nest provides protection, therefore females prefer males who are building these nests. There's another type of individual in these species where that looks like a female but is actually a male. And he comes in, the nesting male doesn't see him as a threat, and then he releases his sperm and goes away. So he's using female mimicry to sneak copulations. Right? These males are known as satellite males. Now, of course, they're not going to be able to fertilize as many eggs as the nesting male, but they do have some amount of success, and they avoid the costs of courtship and building the nest, right? There's also, it gets more complicated because there are also sneaker males in this species. They're small males, they look like males still, but they are able to sneak past the large male, deposit their sperm, and run away because of their small size. So in this species, this is a very classically known species, and for alternative reproductive tactics, every male actually goes through a phase of being a sneaker male, then a satellite, and then becomes a parental male. So it really depends on your size, and basically at a certain size, you're able to mimic females and able to sneak these copulations in that way. There's many examples of female mimicry in the animal kingdom. One of the most dramatic being these cuttlefish. So at the back here, there's this blogger has many good photos on his blog if you want to check them out. But at the back there is a large male cuttlefish, and underneath him, which you cannot see here, is a female that he's guarding. And this smaller male, he is much smaller. He's like like half the size of this male at least, is going towards this male and changing his colorations to look like a female. And starting with the side that's facing the large male. So I thought this was a really cool photo of how they mimic females. And then what these males do is, because they're smaller, they'll try to mimic females again to sneak past this larger male and gain access to the female and mate with her. So those are cool. And then another classic example of alternative mating strategies is these ruff birds that have these beautiful plumages. They're found all across Europe and Asia and marshes. But again, in this bird, while they are known for their aggressive behavior towards each other, these independent males, there are other male types in the species as well. So here satellite means something a little different. These satellite males actually just hang out with these independent males. They don't fight them, they're subordinate to them. But the way they gain matings is when the independent males go off and are fighting each other to gain access to females. These fader birds are the third male type of the species. They mimic females and get past the aggression of independent males that way. In this species, what's cool is it doesn't change with their age. This is actually a genetic change that's leading to these different mating types. So, what they think is that the independent male is ancestral. A chromosomal inversion, which is a huge genetic change, is led to the female mimic at some point in time, and then later on there's another recombination event or a genetic change that led to these satellite males. So all three males actually coexist at any time in a population. I kind of want to try and understand why. One of the leading theories is this is called frequency-dependent selection. All right. So say you have a ton of independent males, And then some mutation has led to these female mimics, right? The female mimics start getting really successful because they are rare. So they're able to sneak past these males very successfully. And the number of them grows and grows. And at one point, it gets too much, and the independent males are able to tell. And the strategy is not successful anymore, right? And so the number of independent males then starts growing. And then basically these go up and down until they reach kind of like equal levels as time passes. And this is something called negative frequency dependent selection. It's how we explain a lot of systems like alternative mating strategies. Of course, there's other ways in which these evolve, but this is one classic way in which they do. And I really like this definition of it. Negative frequency dependent selection is the primary process that allows rare entities to increase in frequency and simultaneously prevents the common entities from excluding the rare ones, thus facilitating diversity and coexistence of diverse entities. And I just think alternative mating strategies are such a cool example of diverse mating systems. And I'll continue to talk about them, but now we'll get a little more specific with our examples. So while I've shown you some examples of sneak mating, female mimicry, there's another type of mating that exists that is not courtship, and is averts courtship, and is pretty common in the animal kingdom, and this is called sexual coercion. Sexual coercion is very common in chimpanzees and in ducks as well. But in these species, sexual coercion is used as like an extra, like a method of gaining populations when you've really not been successful using courtship and other methods. However, in these fish called least killifish, Hydrangea formosa, these small unassuming fish actually perform sexual coercion behavior exclusively. There's no courtship or any other mating tactic in this species. And what you're seeing here at the bottom, that is his gonopodium. So in this type of fish, they're known as live-bearing fish. They're like the mammals of the fish world. They actually have internal fertilization. So the male copulates with the female, and the offspring are gestated by the female and then released as fully formed offspring. So they do not release their sperm and eggs into the water column. So least killifish is one example of a live-bearing fish, and you can see how big that intermittent organ is compared to his body size. So it is still a very costly kind of adaptation, but in this species, no other mating tactic exists. And live-bearing fish are very diverse. A lot of them have coercion. Most of them have coercive male mating behavior, but it varies, and I'll explain that. So this is one example of a live-bearing fish. This is the western mosquito fish, and you find it everywhere in Texas. So if you were going on a hike and looking in a stream and you see a small, it's likely these fish. And there's only one male mating type, which is a coercive male, and he chases females and attempts to gain copulations with them. So there's advantages to being a coercive male, and not have, similar to how it's advantageous to being a courting male, where you are able to gain populations pretty fast and when you are successful. So the only disadvantage is that you are not always successful, because females are aversive to this kind of mating behavior. Even in a species that has all coercive males, females still have preference for ornaments when you present them with males that have ornaments. But they don't have to develop ornaments themselves and are able to reproduce successfully. And another species that often coexists with western mosquito fish, sailfin mollies, there are multiple male types. So in this species, you do see males that court females as well, as you can see here, but there are also coercive males. So multiple mating tactics, or alternative mating tactics, exist in the same species. And one quick segue, like side note, in the San Marcos River, you can actually also find this other type of molly called the Amazon mollies. The Amazon mollies are, they will only have offspring that are females. So they produce offspring that are all females and are clones of the mother. But to do this, they have to mate with a sailfin molly male in order for that reproduction to be initiated. So there's no males in this species, no mating tactics, but they do have to deal with the sailfins. as a side note. Then there's guppies, which a lot of us are familiar with because they're very common aquarium fish. Guppies actually only have this one mating type, but this one male can perform both courtship and coercion. He can almost decide when to do what. So in studies, people have found that a male guppy can change his mating behavior given its social environment. So say you have a lot of large males around you, you actually start performing more coercive behaviors because you know your courtship is not going to be more attractive than the other large males. But when predators are present, a coercive male also has more advantages than a courting male because if you're flashing your bright colors, you might be eaten. So guppies are really cool. There's only one mating type, but they can vary it with their environment. And then there's another type of fish called Physiology or the melanzona guppy, which has 5 mating types. This picture is from a paper in 2004 that I think first described them. So a lot of people are still trying to puzzle out like what's happening with them. But yeah, there's A, B, C, D, and E are all different male types in the same species, and in F, that's a female. These 3 are called the red, yellow, and blue morphs. I believe they all do courtship. That male type that looks like he should be the displayer, I believe, performs coercive mating, and then the other one does too. And I believe the one on top there in the panel D is territorial. So he doesn't perform courtship, but he is territorial and will fight off other males. All right. So Liberian fish are really cool. I study one species of them called Xiphophorus nigrensis, or the L. abra swordtail. They're known as swordtails because of this sword that you see here, which makes them appear bigger to females and more attractive. And they're very pretty. They're like this blue color, and they come from Nacimiento Rio Choy in Mexico. Now, because they are, so the large male courts females. As you can tell, he has all the stuff needed for courtship. The smaller males will perform this coercive mating behavior of chasing females and copulating with them. And in this species too, just like the rough birds, it's actually a change in their genome that results in these different mating tactics. So the large males, it's been shown, are more susceptible to predation in the wild. They are large, they have ornamentation, and their coloration is also very preferable to their predators, who happen to be Astyanax, the Mexican tetra that I used to study in my previous lab, which I think is really fun. But the smaller males also have some costs that come with their mating strategy. They have to invest more in their sperm quality. So in a lot of species with alternative mating tactics, this is true. The smaller males, or the ones that are sneaking, invest more into the quantity and quality of their sperm, which is very physiologically taxing, but they need to do this because they're not often successful with their reproduction. So when they are successful, they need to ensure that the mating, the fertilization is successful as well. So what I've, in my research program, I've asked what are the consequences of these alternative mating tactics. So far I've talked to you about the causes of a lot of these alternative mating tactics, and in my research I go beyond that and ask about what are the consequences of just being different mating types and also then interacting with the environment differently, right? So does having these different mating tactics also change how you respond to your environment? We actually keep these fish in these cattle tanks that are right here at BFL. I'm not sure if you guys walked past them, but this is where our semi-natural ponds are, where the swordtails live. And they've been here since about the 80s, I believe. I've just been growing and reproducing. And whenever we need them, we pick them up from here, take them to our lab, record them with a lot of cameras, and then put them back here. And that's why we have a supply of this really cool species to work with and to study without having to go to Mexico. And what I do with them is I try to, again, understand the consequences of having different mating strategies. So one of the things I look at is whether they respond to stress differently. Now, if you are in a novel environment, are you going to be able to be calm? That's one of the things I study. So I use these two tests. One of them is called the light-dark test, where we divide a tank into kind of like a light zone and a darker zone, and we see how much time they spend in this dark zone versus the lighter zone. So fish that dare to venture out into this lighter zone, we say that they have more exploratory behavior, whereas the fish that spend more time in this darker, more sheltered zone, we say that they display anxiety-like behaviors. Now, there's a lot of nuance that comes with this, but I can talk about this later if you're interested. There's another behavior we call it the open field test. And again, here, it's not actually going to be shaded like that in real life, but what I do then is go in and see how much time is a fish spending in the corners of the tank versus in the middle of the tank. And again, that's an indicator in a new environment. Are you taking more shelter, or are you trying to go off into the spaces that are more open? And what I see here is that large males spend more time in the sheltered areas of the tank consistently. I also measured their physiological response to acute stress using this waterborne cortisol experiment. So these fish are very small. I can't really take any plasma from them to measure their cortisol. So we actually collect it from water. I isolate them for a bit. I put them in this beaker just with some water for 30 minutes. And then I take this water and extract cortisol from it, and that's how I measure it. I do this before and after an acute stressor. And the acute stress is simply a low water level for about 30 minutes, which stresses them out just a little bit, but not enough to cause any health deficits, right? And what I measure then is how does their cortisol level change due to this exposure to acute stress. And so given that I've told you that larger males spend more time in these sheltered areas of the tank, which male type do you think is more stress reactive in terms of physiological stress response? The large males are not. It's actually the small males that have greater cortisol response to this acute stressor. And it could be due to many reasons, right? Like, one thing I've shown you is one consequence of these different mating tactics is that the large males are more susceptible to predation in the wild. Now, this is in the wild. In BFL, they actually don't experience any predation, right, when we keep them here. But could it be a trait that has just developed in these large males because of their ornamentation? They've developed a tendency to go into more sheltered zones and hide. Similarly with the small males, they have this greater cortisol response to stress. One of the working hypotheses is that they have spent more time moving around, searching for mates, right? And so does this greater activity, greater vigilance at all times lead to greater cortisol response? In my work and work done by other people in my lab and by other people in the past, a lot of this work has been done at UT on this system. There's all of these other things we have found about these species. So for example, we found that large males are better at spatial learning, which makes a lot of sense when you think about these females of the species. They'll form these little groups to forage in. And for males, it's advantageous for large males to know where these groups are and then go and solicit courtships with those groups. For small males, I have actually found that they are more active and have more exploratory behavior, which may help explain this always high cortisol response, maybe not, who knows. Large males are also more aggressive to other large males. There's male-male competition for females. But then we have found some things that are similar between these males, right? I've found that they are equally good at associative learning, which is another thing we do in our lab. We test learning and memory in fish. And I found that they're both equally good at it. And I also see previous researchers have found that there's also no differences in testosterone levels and a lot of other things that people have typically found in individuals with alternative mating tactics. And so what I'm doing now as a part of my research, which I won't talk about today, is looking at other mechanisms that are going on in these males, because they're both performing mating, but these mating behaviors are very different from each other, and we don't quite know what's going on, like what explains these differences in courtship versus coercion, what mechanisms underlie these two different behaviors. So I just want to end the talk by showing you our light-bearing fish again. They're just like a small slice of the animal kingdom, right? And even in this small group of they're not small. There's a lot of species, but even in this like relatively small group of animals, you find such diversity in mating systems and mating behaviors. And they can actually serve as a great way for us to understand both the causes and the consequences of mating system diversity. And with that, I'd like to say thank you to the Science Under the Stars team, to my lab, the Cummings lab, especially Callan and Max for their comments on this talk. And thank you for listening.
We have plenty of time for questions. I think we might have an extra mic. Y'all can put up your hand. Oh.
Thanks for your talk. Can you say a little bit more about the fish that only produced female? And what I didn't understand was
The Amazon mollies?
what does she mate with?
Can you repeat the question?
Oh yeah, so the question was, can I speak a little more on the Amazon mollies, right? The fish that produce only female offspring. I can. So they reproduce with the male. But their egg.
But there were no males in their species.
Yes.
But
There's no males, correct. So what these Amazon mollies do is they mate with a male of the sailfin molly that initiates reproduction in the Amazon molly, but then the offspring do not have any genetic material from the sailfin that is passed on. So the offspring only have the genetic material from their mothers and not from any father from another species. However, anytime Amazon mollies are found, you will find another species of mollies with them. So like the sailfin molly or the Atlantic molly have to coexist with them in order for them to reproduce, but all the offspring are always female. Now, beyond that, I personally cannot tell you how that happens, like the mechanisms of it, but that's what I know.
Could you say a little bit more about how you classify or how you determine what is coercive and what is courtship? Does it have to do with like the female's behavior, or is there kind of a clear way where you can tell what's happening?
Yes, so coercive mating, and I really should have included videos, and I think I have some on my computer if you want to come and see them later. But coercive males will chase females, and females are aversive to it. So I think it's both the male's behavior and the female's behavior together that tells us that this is a coercive interaction. And you'll see, like, it goes very rapidly, like they'll move around the tank, and then the copulation happens that way. Sometimes, though, it doesn't require a chase in some other species. They are just going to sneak up behind the female, and then the female does have a startle response. So, yes, both the males and the female's behavior need to be recorded in order for us to say, okay, that's a coercive mating interaction. And courtship, at least in our species, is very clearly different. Courtship always involves these like display behaviors. They hang out around the female, and then the mating will happen. So we can very clearly tell that apart in our species that way.
Just testing. You have one question over here.
So back to the species that only has females. Does that change the definition of species since it can't reproduce with only members of its own group?
So I would say we define species, but one of the definitions of species is that they can only mate with each other, and then the offspring also have the genetic material of both the parents, and then they continue on. So that's why, because their genetic makeup is going to be completely different from the sailfin mollies, that's why we still call them two different species here. Because the female offspring of Amazon mollies do not have any genetic material from the sailfin mollies that gets passed on.
Do you understand how that happens at all?
I think there's some ideas, but again, it's like a big field of research right now.
What's the evolutionary advantage to the female being aversive to mating in the coercive courtship?
Yeah, that's a great question, right? Like females are always like running away from these males, but they do need to mate eventually. And I think this is happening because there's a lot of coercion is costly to females. The other part of my research that I didn't talk about is I've seen that it just living around coercive males for a longer time increases these females' stress response, stress-related behaviors, things like that. And it's also sometimes physically harmful to the female. But the males are successful sometimes, and so it just keeps that's just what keeps getting passed on in these individuals. Now, sometimes they will, once she has reached a certain level of an age or like a state of gravidity, like she will mate with these males even then. But in general, it is a coercive mating system. So it's a very good question. Like, what is the advantage? Why are they always like aversive to these males? And but just that's like the fascinating part of it.
Do you know why some species evolved into like male selectiveness?
So the question was, why did some species evolve into male selectiveness or male choosiness for females? And I think it's because typically when we thought of just the sperm and egg being the only cost that then needs to be avoided using courtship and like using ornamentation, the males are still investing quite a lot into reproduction. Like courtship is costly, developing ornamentation and coloration is costly, and at one point that becomes so costly that they start being choosy about which females they will invest in. And so the point I was trying to make was that this egg and sperm idea, eggs being more costly than sperm, is not the only thing that creates a cost-benefit divide between males and females. It can be all these other characteristics that males are investing in as well. They all add up.
Is there a reason that we can see all these different mating types like present in such a broad like selection of species and like animals?
So I think you're asking like, why is there so much diversity in them? Why is there not just like?
I'm also asking like, what caused like parallel evolution so where like all the species have these same like handful of types?
So the question was, why is there so much parallel evolution where, rough birds and swordtails almost coming up with like a similar type of strategy? They're so unrelated. And that's a great question. I mean, these just turn out to be really good strategies perhaps for these animals to use, and they end up persisting in these environments. I think, some of the reasons I explained, like the frequency-dependent selection is a very strong mechanism by which some of these alternative mating tactics occur, and they do happen independently in many different lineages. But it is still, a big question, like why these few strategies and not like a bunch of others. One of the things that I didn't talk about throughout this entire talk was any invertebrates that have even more diversity of mating behaviors. If you ever look up, there's a lot of spiders, there's a lot of wasps that have even cooler, crazier mating tactics and strategies. But I only mentioned one in this talk. If anybody can guess which invertebrate was mentioned, I have a sticker for you. That's all I have. But any guesses?
Jellyfish.
It was the cuttlefish. Yes. Nice. That was the only invertebrate I mentioned because if I talked about them, this talk would never end.
Any more questions? Yeah, there's one. Okay.
Does being so involved in this research on animal mating behaviors change how you think about human mating behaviors?
This has changed the way she thinks of
question was, does thinking about these animals make me think about human mating behaviors? I think about that. I don't quite study it, so I can't answer any questions about it because I think human mating strategies and behaviors are so complicated that they should only be left to psychologists and people who specialize in them. But I think yes, animals can still help us learn a lot about ourselves, and that's kind of the extent of it. And I do have a way of keeping these things separate while also increasing my fascination with human mating behavior. But that's it. Right.
Hi. So the native habitats of these swordtails or any other live bears with coercion, are those habitats large enough that the females could avoid males until they don't want to avoid them anymore, where that might not be possible when we're observing them in captivity?
Yes, so you asked like if the environments are large enough, can the females just like go and hide somewhere basically and like just avert these males completely? Yeah, they do tend to like shoal with each other quite a lot. These are very social species. But you do find them in these like small patches in a lot of places where they are inevitably going to access males. These males are also very wily and will go and find the females wherever they go. And I think that's I think my answer is from what I know of these species. And yes, it is very hard to test in our tanks where we keep them and observe them for most of the time in these small groups. But again, there's a disadvantage to just being away from all the other members of your species, right? Because one, it makes you more vulnerable to predation, but then two, also you do have to mate at some point. Again, like I said, there's like a whole confusion there. Aversive to these males, but they still have to mate with them. So, all right. All right, thank you everyone. I'm here if you have more questions.
Alright, I just want to thank everybody for coming to our last Science Under Stars talk this year. And in this cold weather, thank you all for coming here and support us. We have our January event on
15th.
January 15th, yes, thank you, Smriti. And it's going to be about migratory birds in Texas and how climate change might affect that. Presented by Brian Stokes, who is another graduate student in the IB department. And then we're still working on the details of the other talks for next semester, but it's going to be very exciting, and I hope you all can come support us more. And thanks everybody for coming, and have a wonderful holiday season.